Greg Rucka, you are one spurgy boy. You can write a good comic.
In the middle of the streets of Eden, the four winds blow. I've been living underneath the shadow of my father's soul. Ooh, here I go. I'm here and gone. Ain't it funny how the road that made you can't outrun? Ain't it funny how the place that saves you will burn you up? Ooh, here I go. I'm here and gone.
Lazarus, written by Greg Rucka and drawn by Michael Lark, takes place in a not too distant future where governments no longer exist and the planet is divided into multiple districts. Each district is controlled and ran by powerful families. Each family runs its district differently. You have those like our main characters, the family Carlisle, which runs the western side of North America, with slight indifference to the public at large. Granted, they do grant them jobs and citizenship, kinda, if you can call it that, if you work for them. But those who don't work for them are designated as waste. And as you read the series, you kind of realize they're one of the more merciful families. Another family that will show the opposite side of the spectrum would be the family Hawk, which runs the eastern side of North America. They run their district like an Orwellian nightmare, having everyone under 24-hour surveillance, keeping them sedated with pills, the skies and buildings littered with propaganda telling the populace to take their medicine. In this world, our main character is Forever, aka Eve Carlisle, a Lazarus of her family. A Lazarus in this universe is basically a champion or a guardian for their family. They carry out secret missions, whether that would be assassination, exfiltration, espionage, as well as serving as their family's bodyguards whenever they're away from their home or base of operations. Another Lazarus that we see throughout the series would be Joaquin Moret, whose family controls all of Mexico and is also the love interest for Eve. And whenever the two actually do have time together, they have some pretty cool moments, during an action scene or having a really interesting conversation. Sonia Bittner is another predominant Lazarus that shows up. Her family controls East Canada and all of Greenland, and at first kind of serves to be a antagonistic force of sorts, but is actually on good terms with Eve and is actually good friends with her, making a trial by combat scene that happens actually later on in the series between the two actually pretty tense. Greg does a good job of setting up their relationship, and as you continue to read, you're introduced to the world a bit more, you show more snippets, and also seeing the characters interact with each other. Even though you're not given that much backstory with each of them, how they interact and how they talk to each other gives you enough to show that there is a massive history behind each and every one of them. And like I mentioned before with Sonia and Eve, that is an example of one of the dynamics that we actually see the most of. Like, there are other family members, for example, in a story arc that play a game of poker, I believe, and where you actually see a lot of good dialogue in between them talking about how they run their districts or how their waste is treated or if there's been any rebellions or something of that nature, etc., etc. But with the Lazari or Lazarus that we actually see throughout the series that interact with each other, that train with each other, like, shows this level of friendship and camaraderie, and you see it's so actually pretty well done and well written. And actually you see the bond between the characters and you see just how alive this world is. And that's one of the positives with Rucka's writing, is that he's skilled enough to actually just fill this world with life. And even though you're watching it through mostly Eve's lens, even though there are other characters, point of view characters that are in the story, she's the one you see the most of, and she's the one who is the main focus of. You do get this rich sense of like familiarity and history, despite like not getting constant flashbacks or not getting, oh, remember when this happened, remember this happened. Like, that's not, like, you do get the occasional callback, but it's never up to that extent though. But like how the dialogue and how things are progressed and how things are written is actually pretty spot on, and is an example of Rucka's character work and his dialogue writing that is actually spot on. Is one of the reasons why Lazarus is actually really good. It's actually one of my favorite graphic novels from Image, to be honest. And in regards to the underlying story of Lazarus, throughout is rather a personal one to our main character Eve. At the start, she actually gets a sense that her family has not been fully transparent with her, and that she might not be who she thinks she is. And the further we go along, the layers actually get peeled back. We learn there is a lot more going under the surface. There is actually a massive twist that happens, but don't worry, I will not spoil it. It's actually a really good one. You have to read it for yourself to see what it is. But that was me actually talking about the underlying narrative, something we see throughout the series. As you start the comic, there are like a few arcs. They do lead into each other, but they are different. You'll have one arc dealing with one family, or next arc you'll deal with like other group. You'll have individual issues focusing on like one character, etc, etc. But the main plot, the one that's practically the arc that the good chunk of the series actually has been building up to pretty well, is the all-out war. Now, the series does not start out with this storyline like I mentioned before, but they do build up to it. As I stated before, each arc kind of leads into the next one, and the very first arc plays a major role into the later arc. And once the war arc finally happens, House Carlisle, the main house that we've been focusing on, House Hawk, as well as their allies, all duke it out. And what happens in this arc are a plethora of twists, betrayals, and some fantastic character moments. Many of my favorite moments in this entire comic are in this arc in particular, and in my opinion, is the main selling point of Lazarus. Seeing the tension, this rubber band being stretched for arcs on end, eventually snap into what is basically the main arc of the series. Now, as much as I love to gush about this comic all day long, I have to relay some level of bad news. Now, what it is basically Lazarus isn't finished. The main series kind of ends on a cliffhanger. Granted, there is a continuation, Lazarus Risen, but there is a caveat to this as well. In Risen, let's start with the bad news. There are 7 issues out right now, and a new issue will be released once every blue moon. Now, the good news in that is each issue is close to around 60 some odd pages, so there is a bang for your buck in that regard. But when you catch up, you're going to be waiting like everybody else. But if you don't mind that, you don't mind reading something by good old Greg Rucka, you're in for a pretty damn good read. I will admit, Lazarus is one of my favorite comics that's currently out right now, and is one of my favorite pieces of dystopian fiction, or at least comic wise. It actually has some aspects of cyberpunk. To be frank, there's a lot of futuristic stuff. Some characters actually live longer. The Carlisles are actually a lot older than they actually seem they are. Things such as like bioimplants, healing factors, various cures for diseases, are all take place in this world, but kind of similar to the real world, where the more rundown eras would have old technology and useless technology in comparison to futuristic flying gunships basically operating on jet engines. So again, if you're a fan of the cyberpunk genre, you're a fan of dystopian fiction in general, this is hands down a good read. And the action, also something I haven't talked about as much, is actually really good. The framing, the paneling, all structured well enough. There is a lot of great scenes. The artwork done by Michael, I think, is some of the best. It has a very cinematic style. I believe the man has drawn for Marvel before that has a very grainy style, a very gritty, realistic look to it. One that I think really fits the series as well, giving it this very, I don't know, cinematic feels the right word, but it feels like the word that comes to mind. It feels like a very good TV show, if that makes sense. It feels like a very good HBO series, or a very good premium drama basically in a comic book format, which is done insanely well. And also the war sequences are also done in extremely as well, especially since the characters in that particular arc and the beginning, I believe the beginning stages of the war arc itself actually have shown up in arcs beforehand, and we do see how in a good way actually shows you all perspectives in this world, where we see the families, we see the Lazarus, we see the lesser peasants basically, and how each person's decision affects the other. And that's something that I think is done extremely well also in regards to Lazarus. Again, hands down, this is a good recommendation, even though I mentioned before, Greg is a bit of a spurg. He's a Spurky boy, he's a comic book writer, but if you're willing to ignore that, and if it bugs you that much you don't want to give him money, you can just pirate it. I don't really care. I do recommend this regardless. So those are essentially my thoughts on Lazarus. As usual, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Got anything to recommend me? Feel free to join the Discord. Link is in the description. As always, stay chill, Wanderers. Catch you later.